Well, it's good to be back with you again. And I said I was going to do Revelation 9 tonight, and I've been praying about that, and I was thinking about that, and I've decided to insert my Maroon resource book information here tonight, and we'll do Revelation 9 tomorrow. The reason I did that was that the resource book was developed by Adventist documents that I found in the archives in various places over the last 19 years. And I came about the idea of a resource book, realizing that I was coming across documents that no one had ever seen before, or people had seen, but they didn't know the significance of it in reaching the Islamic world. And so I'm going over the resource book. My friend Jason Hovey, who's here with me in Minnesota, he's here getting this all ready to go on our website. And I've had aspects of the resource book on my webpage before, but this is essential for people to really understand what our Adventist church was doing all these years, because I've made some statements that said the Adventist church is not really doing a lot for Muslim ministry, but when you look at our Adventist archives, it's full of information. And so anyway, let me get my pages going here. And I'll see if I can get them up here. Okay, now this table of contents, this is the way it is in the Maroon resource book. I don't know if I don't see a camera here, so you probably can't see me.
They can't see you. They could see you.
It's Lord. And so anyway, my resource book is a maroon cover, and it basically is a table of contents like this. And I'm going to go through here, scale down or scan down. It has the document here of my 2300-day chart, the beast on it. The back page of that has a 2300-day timeline, so you can follow if you aren't familiar with that. And that's in my resource book. Also, it's online. This is my address. And whoops, we got the wrong address on here. It should be 355 rather than 385. And it's got maps. These are very good maps.
Stephen?
Yes.
Stephen, you have to share your video because we're not your screen. Share your screen because we're not seeing you. We're seeing you, but we're not seeing your what's on your computer.
Excuse me, I thought we had that.
No, not yet.
Okay, you'll want to start over then, Steve. Did that do that? Okay.
Can you
There
see
you
it
go.
now?
Yes.
Start
Okay.
You've got the chart up?
We'll go up here. I see it. Okay.
We're good now.
This is the way the resource book looks if you actually had a copy. When you go to the website, Jason's got it set up pretty much that this is what you'll see. And there's pages on here that are very significant. And what we did when I made my resource book, when I photocopied pages or took PDF files, I left them in their original format, because remember, my concern was the believability. I wanted to have things that were in its original format the way I found them, so people couldn't say that I had formatted it differently and changed it, because now all the print is the same. When I print this in the Philippines for my classes there, I print them, everything is the same copy and all that. It's different than what I do here in America. But the color is here, vibrant. The 2300 timeline explains what the dates are, the maps. And when I get to the points, I'm going to slow down. I'm just giving an overview. The charts, the 1843 chart. This area right here is all the Muslims. That was amazing. This was done by the Millerites. This was done by William Miller, Josiah Litch. This here was by Brother Nickel. That's his name right there, Nickel. And 1/3 of our prophetic side of the story was Islam. 1/3. And this is the chart that I showed the Turkish people in Istanbul. And that's, we got it, once they saw that and the significance that we were not condemning Islam, but showing it in a positive light, that's when we got on national television 2 days later, and also interviewed by the newspaper publisher. This is just an explanation of my research understandings, how I went about that. And then I have source material for trumpet and woe study. I have here the King James Version Bible, Daniel Revelation by Uriah Smith, eSword.com website for PCs, The History of Protestantism by J.A. Wiley, and that's a 3-volume set. I have Heartland's Publishing on there. You now get that online. You don't need to buy it. Back in the days when I wanted to get it, that 3-volume set, I think, cost me close to $600 to get before it's online. Now it's online free. Eureka, an Exposition of the Apocalypse by John Thomas. The Eastern Question by Marriott, to study in European diplomacy. Here I Stand, Roland Bainton, Life of Martin Luther. Truth Triumphant, B.G. Wilkinson. The church doesn't look at Wilkinson as significant anymore. I found his secretary. She was an old lady. She's now passed away when I first got into this work. And I asked her for all of his articles. And being a typical school teacher from the Depression era up through the 1940s and 50s, she said, Elder Wilkinson kept everything in a shoebox. And I said, are you serious? She says, I'm serious. And she says, once the shoebox was gone, I have no idea where it's at now. So anyway, but if you find his book, read that book. It's clear and concise and direct. It's an excellent read. And it's well worth the read. Then Review and Herald articles by Hiram Edson. Excellent resource, excellent read. National Geographic, 1987. That book you can find, if those of you who've got piles of National Geographic, see if you got it. It's November 1987, and it shows the story of Suleiman the Magnificent as he did battle in Europe. Excellent, excellent. 10 Great Religions, we have that information here in the resource. And then my book, Islam, God's Forgotten Blessing. And we encourage you to get resources if you're interested. What I find is that the information that God has given our church is impeccable. It's correct. Okay. Now, this is the first document I found that was significant. This is called Principles of Life from the Word of God, a systematic study of the major doctrines of the Bible. Printed in 1952 by the Pacific Press Association. This is for 12th grade academy students in the 1950s and early 1960s. Here they have, from the General Conference, statements in this book of what our probably parents and grandparents were taught. This book here came from my sister. It says, most Bible expositors are agreed that Muhammad is symbolized by the star of this trumpet. Tomorrow, when we get into Revelation 9, we're going to show that Muhammad was a star that fell from heaven. And that today, the modern church era, I'm one of the very few people who still say that's Islam, but most men today want to say that the star that fell at that time was Lucifer. I'm just a layman. I thought Lucifer fell before or during the Garden of Eden time, not 6 centuries after Christ was here. I'm kind of slow sometimes, but I wasn't born last night. This is not Lucifer falling in the 5th and 6th century. Then it says down here in the yellow, it says, the darkening caused by the smoke fitly represents the spread of Islam and its doctrines over Asia and portions of Europe. When I was doing my original reading years ago, one of the things I came to realize when you do research and you don't know where you're going to end up, you have to read so much more material because you are looking for an ending. You're looking for the method, for the understanding. It isn't like you have a preconceived concept. You have to read everything so your concept can be recognized and organized by what you're reading. And you have to check the validity of the sources. One of the things I found that most Adventist writers were saying, including James White, including Uriah Smith, and that is that the smoke represented the apostasy or the spread of Islam. I had to struggle with that because I realized when you look at the Bible smoke is always God's anger at his people. So that's one of the first things I had to come and struggle with this. I mean, this took days to come to these viewpoints, to look and read and study. But this here is Principles of Life, a systematic study of the major doctrines of the Bible, printed by the Pacific Press. Now, this document is in the resource book, and we charge for the resource book $25. If you want to go online, you can get it free of charge. Okay. The next page here is the dictionary by Noah Webster. He talks about the heathen up here, and he says the heathen or pagan. What is one who lives in the country or woods as pagan, from Pegasus, a village? Number one, a pagan means a Gentile, one who worships idols or is unacquainted with the true God. In the scriptures, the word seems to comprehend all nations except the Jews and Israelites, as they were all strangers to the true religion and all addicted to idolatry. The word may now be applied perhaps to all nations except to Christians and Mohammedans or Muslims. Back then, they were called Mohammedans. The point being, less than 150 or 200 years ago, Muslims were never called pagans because they worshiped the one true God. That was very important to comprehend and to realize what was going on. The next book here is Unfolding Revelation by Roy Allen Anderson. This is what Roy Allen Anderson says. Now, this is significant. Roy Allen Anderson was the ministerial director and also the editor of the Ministry magazine during the day in the 1950s. Robert Spangler became that in the 1960s and 70s. It didn't get any better underneath Elder Spangler. This is what Roy Allen Anderson said. It was here that Mohammedan arose and spread like a smoke. This false and fanatical faith threatened at one time to obscure the light of the gospel. That's what I'm saying. The smoke is not true because our Adventist early pioneers here and people in the 50s didn't really understand the work of Islam. And by the time we get through here on Wednesday, we hope for you to understand that. Over here reading, it says here, the Mohammedans, I'll start up here. The Saracenic invasions could be described in no better language than is used here. Like a horde of locusts out of the smoke, Mohammedanism swept on. The star to whom the key was given well describes the prophet Muhammad. But although fanatical, they were not plunderers like the conquerors of Western Rome. When the Arabian tribes gathered for the conquest of Syria in 632, Muhammad's uncle Abu Bakr, who succeeded the prophet after his death, gave this following order, which fits the Bible prophecy exactly. When you fight the battles of the Lord, acquit yourselves like men, without turning your backs, but let not your victory be stained with the blood of women or children. Destroy no palm trees, nor burn any fields of corn. Cut down no fruit trees, nor do any mischief to the cattle. Only such as you kill to eat. When you make any covenant or article, stand to it, and be as good as your word. As you go on, you will find some religious persons who live in retired monasteries and propose to themselves to serve God that way. Let them alone. Neither kill them, nor destroy their monasteries, and you will find another sort of people that belong to the synagogue of Satan, who have shaven crowns. Be sure you cleave their skulls and give them no quarter till they either turn to Mohammedan or pay tribute. This was written by Edward Gibbon, History and Decline and the Fall of the Roman Empire. The point that I'm making here is that this is in an Adventist leader's book he wrote. This book was sent to every church in the division because I've been in all these little church libraries. This book is in there. Now, the point being is that Islam was sent to kill the apostate church leaders and priests of the Roman Catholic system because they had changed the worship day from Sabbath to Sunday, brought alcohol into the service, worshiping idols, carrying on, priests could not marry, praying to dead people. This is what, and also pork eating, big thing. This is what was going on in the Christian world. And the Muslims were told, you kill these people. They were given that mandate. Tomorrow we'll see from the Bible in Revelation chapter 9. Here I stand. This is another book written by Roland Bainton. And this is something here as we go down here. This is the important paragraph right here. It says, the charge of Bohemianism, that's where Huff and Jerome, they were tried and found wanting, and they were basically killed as martyrs. It says here, the charge of Bohemianism against Luther had plainly lodged because he was condemned on the score of introducing certain of the articles of John Huss. Too characteristically, Erasmus attendants received strictures that to burn heretics against the will of the Spirit, that war against the Turks is resistance to God's visitation. In other words, Luther here is pointing out, or Bainton is, a result of Luther, burning heretics is against God's will. That's some of the people that were resisting Rome and what was going on. Abu Bakr. This you find in Uriah Smith's book, Daniel the Revelation. You can find this at other places, but this is where you find it primarily. Right up here, so Abu Bakr was the next leader to take over after Muhammad died. The first quote is found in the Seventh-day Adventist book by Uriah Smith, Daniel the Revelation. It says here, I'll read the yellow. After the death of Muhammad, he was succeeded by the command of Abu Bakr in 632 AD, who, soon after he had fairly established his authority in government, dispatched a circular letter to the Arabian tribes from which the following is an extract. This is what Abu Bakr said. This is what you'll find tomorrow when we go over Revelation 9. When you fight the battles of the Lord, acquit yourselves like men, without turning your backs, but let not your victory be stained with the blood of women and children. Destroy no palm trees, nor burn any fields of corn. Cut down no fruit trees, nor do any mischief to cattle. Only such as you kill to eat. When you make it a covenant or article, stand to it, and be as good as your word. And as you go, you'll find some religious persons who have retired to live in monasteries and propose to themselves to serve God that way. Let them alone. Neither kill them nor destroy their monasteries. Excuse me, I've got to get a drink of water. I've got the hiccups. And as you go, you'll find some religious persons who live in monasteries and propose to themselves to serve God that way. Let them alone. That belong to the synagogue. Excuse me. And you'll find another sort of people that belong to the synagogue of Satan, who have shaven crowns. Be sure you cleave their skulls. Give them no quarter till they either turn to Muhammad or pay tribute. You see, God was bringing judgment upon his church. Right now, it's very hard many times for Seventh-day Adventists to realize that church in Rome was actually our church. They were the ones who had the lineage back to the disciples and so forth. This is the National Geographic. The whole book, November 1987, is into Suleiman the Magnificent. It's an excellent read. And Martin Luther interests Suleiman. And he says, how old is he? He's 48. I wish he were even younger. He'd find me a gracious protector. Here, Suleiman realizes he would protect Luther. He'd be fair and honest. And because who was trying to kill Luther at this time? The church. Charles V out of Spain. The popes were trying to kill Luther. Suleiman realized that he was going to be protecting this man because Protestants didn't believe in idols. National Geographic, excellent to read. Earlier, Luther, whose Reformation was able to take root because of the empire's distraction by the Turks, had declared that to fight against the Turks is to resist the Lord who visits our sins with such rods. Smoke. There is actually 2 pages, front and back, of 8.5, 11, small print in the King James Version that has smoke in the Bible verses in the King James Version. Psalm 74, verse 1, it says, O God, why hast thou cast us off forever? Why does thine anger smoke against the sheep of thy pasture? Unquote. Here you'll notice that smoke means God's anger against his people for sin. And this is just what the church at Rome had done by 538. They had sinned against God. You see, the early Adventists in the General Conference, the North American Division, had missed this small point that the smoke was not Islam. The smoke was God's anger against his church for their apostasy and sin. That's a principle. That's biblically based. As a pledge of this covenant of God with men, a smoking furnace and a burning lamp, symbols of the divine presence passed between the severed victims, totally consumed them. Again, a voice was heard by Abraham confirming the gift of the land of Canaan to his descendants from the river of Egypt under the great river Euphrates. So we have this whole page in there. You can read it. I only talk about 2 verses there. This is rules of interpretation. Rules of interpretation came out of Fred Bishkoff's work, who passed away here about 2 months ago. Dr. Bishkoff had a burden to get the Adventist Pioneer writings in CD-ROM. When I first started in this in about 2001, 2002, I met people that had the ability to type, printing or typing page after page of documents for this CD-ROM on a computer. Computers were first coming in at that point in time, and people were just starting to get familiar with CD-ROMs. The small memory disk and so forth like that was just waning. The CD-ROM was just coming in. Dr. Bishkoff organized a group of about 5 typists and about 3 others that I've met at the course of my travels that were typing this. These people have received no recognition for what they did. They have given all of us today the ability to go back and see what William Miller said, to see what Uriah Smith said, to see what the different pioneers, what all those men did, and women. Now, the significance here, William Miller is the one who came up with the words that water means people and so forth. And when I found this work, I was going through it, and I am scanning through this and I'm reading it, and I'm going to come down here to large print, and I want you to look at this and just consider what is said right here. This comes after a lamb. Lamb means Messiah, a king, form of governments. This is what William Miller said. The lamp means the Word of God, Bible, or Mohammedan Bible, the Quran. I've read pretty much all of William Miller's writings, and this is never referred to again. I just give this for information because the significance of when we talk about righteousness in the Quran about the law and the gospel. William Miller read enough of the Quran to know that this was not a pagan book. This was not a demonic book. This was not the devil's book, as many of us as Seventh-day Adventists believe today. This was a book that could be used, and like I said yesterday, the day before, remember, before Gutenberg's press printed Luther's Bible, those previous 800 years, there was no word of God as we Westerners think what that should be. But the Quran was in every Arab village throughout the Middle East in the Quran form. This was God's word to his people. Now that's real hard for us as Seventh-day Adventists. We almost have to take a hard swallow at that. But one of the things that the last document that I'm going to show here, if I have time, I'm going to keep going here, of what the Quran is actually saying. We're going to also address the word about when the Quran talks about who to fight. So the document here, the lamp means the Word of God or the Mohammedan Bible or the Quran. Okay, so we keep on moving on here. Historical background for British worldwide military action. When I came to this understanding that Islam was in Scripture, it was also in Bible prophecy. Chapter 18 of the Great Controversy talks about that. And what I found that most academics within our church deny the existence of Islam in the Bible, and especially in Ellen White's writings. I couldn't understand that because chapter 18 is very significant. So I went through and I searched and I found different activities that the British Navy was active on in the Mediterranean. And this here is found here. And I have since been able to access Elder Ron Dupree, who is a PhD. He wrote a document that he submitted to the BRI 2 years ago that has the story of August 11th, 1840. This is significant because this is what launched the Millerite movement from meetings of 10 to 15 to 20 people or more maybe 30, when Josiah Litch, the Millerite person who looked at these prophecies, looked at the prophecies in Revelation chapter 9 as well, the numbers and the days, he made a prediction that the Ottoman Empire was going to lose its autonomy at some point in time in the month of August, 1840. He said this before he told William Miller, and I can expect what William Miller thought or said, but they also realized when they looked at the prophecies and said, this will happen. The Millerites really let it all hang out. Yes, we blame them for misunderstanding 1843 and 1844, which is correct. But the prophecies they named on August 11th, 1840, they were right on exactly. And Ron Dupree, he heard and was understanding what we were saying. He realized that what we were saying is right. I didn't have, I went to my local library, brought in the newspapers from London, England and everything, looked and looked and looked, and I didn't find any smoking gun. I found strong circumstantial evidence, which is in this document we have right here. We also have Ron Dupree's document where he uses academics to prove the writings of what the Millerites were saying was true, and that the demise of the Ottoman Empire was going to happen on August 11th, 1840. When I share that with Muslims in Turkey, they say, that's right. You are right. Seventh-day Adventists are right. These are things that changes the day when you're working with Muslims. In July 1840, Britain, Austria, Russia, Prussia agreed to back Turkey, and Admiral Sir Robert Stopford ordered Captain Charles Napier to proceed to Beirut, which was captured on 11th August. It's interesting. I'm an American history nut. Charles Napier was the British admiral that was in the Battle of Baltimore. So this was quite a well-known admiral. And now he was posted into the Mediterranean. My good friend, Vicki Lawrence, who has been a big supporter of our ministry through the years. She was a person who was my copy editor. And she's done a wonderful work on my book. And I remember she told me, she said, Stephen, your work's going to go around the world. And I looked at her. We're sitting at her kitchen table. And I said, well, I don't understand that. I said, it's just made for Adventists. She said, it will. Watch what will happen. Now, over 10 years later, I was at her house here a few weeks ago. I said, Vicki, you were right. I never comprehended. She sent me a folder years ago with the ministry magazines that I show here from June and July of 1944. And this work was compiled by Grace Amadon. Grace Amadon's father was a contemporary with Uriah Smith, who worked at the review office in Battle Creek. Grace Amadon never got married. She is what you'd call in those days an old maid. But she dedicated her heart to the church, and she was a researcher. And what she researched here, and I printed this off the General Conference website, the ministry magazines for the month of June and July. I'm going to scroll down here. Most of the article, the documentation was by Roland Lothby. I'm told by Adventist scholars today, Lothby was a real scholar. He was at the Washington Seminary before it moved to Andrews. And this is basically written by him, but it's also put together by Grace Amadon, who supplied all the outside information. And the issue that I was being confronted with in those days, that Islam is not in the Bible. So I went to I'm gonna try it. Something's happened here. I lost this page and I can't retrieve it. Let me go down here and see if I can find it here.
I think things got moved a bit.
I'm sorry, folks. I lost 2 pages here. They're slipped down in this file. But basically what this is, it shows Protestants, and I don't know how to retrieve it. Anyway, what this is, it shows the Protestants by century believing that Islam is in Revelation chapter 9. And if you've got an old resource book of mine, it's in there in its entirety. I'm just really sorry about this because I was counting this to show, and I don't know how to fix that in this situation. Okay, here's part of it. Okay, here it is right here. Okay, these are on facing pages, opening up. Starting in the 1st century, the first group of people from 1190 to 1545 who believed Islam is in chapter 9 was Joachim of Floria in 1190. The Brute of Britain and Martin Luther. Those 3 men believed chapter 9 had Islam in it. In the 16th century, we have John Fox and John Napier. In the 17th century, we have many more that believe that Islam is in chapter 9. When I found these, and also into the 18th century, we see people listed here. Just trying to pick out the major names that Matthew Henry, Thomas Newton, John Gill. In the 19th century, we see some, but we also see fewer and fewer here. Josiah Litch, a Millerite pastor. They believe that chapter 9 was Islam. You get down to the 20th century, it all started to change. Very few, even Adventists, believed that. I have this here to show you that this isn't an idea by William Miller. This was general Protestantism that believed that. Not only believed it, but they knew it to be a fact. That Islam was in chapter 9. That's all here. Then the month of July 1944, it follows up the articles that you can read at your leisure. Okay. Now, this document here starts up here. Ellen White's statements about the fifth and sixth trumpet. Bible eschatology from an Adventist perspective. Fourth International Bible Conference, June 12th, 2018, Rome, Italy, by Elder Ron Dupree. Doctor of Ministry, PhD candidate, pastor, Arizona Conference, and he just was recently the president of the Bangladesh Seminary. Now, this document is here in its entirety. It's 50-some pages long, I think. But this explains that the August 11th, 1840 date is real. It is not make-believe. And that Ellen White was exactly correct about her chapter 18 in the Great Controversy had to do with that prophecy, a portion of it. And so I have that here because we were underneath a lot of pressure. People were saying, when I say people, Adventist academics of renowned scholarship, they were denying the existence of that, even though William Miller was documented for those statements. The early church, the 1850 chart, the 1843 chart were all about the August 11th, 1840 date. My friends, God had the evidence, he had the proof, and we're just going to scan through this because this document is here in its entirety for you to read at your leisure. This is on our website, strawberrymeadowassociation.com. Excuse me, that's a long document to scan through. Okay. We just received this documentation less than a year ago, and now we have it in the resource book. So it's there. Who is Allah? A rose or a thorn? This here is in a trifold tract, even though on the website here it's not in a trifold. It's in a 8.5, 11 page to read. A friend of mine, because so many people were telling us and arguing that Muhammad was not a prophet, Muhammad was make-believe, Muhammad was the name of an evil god, or not Muhammad, Ali. Jason needs some help here. Allah. And so I had Steve Parker, a friend of mine, who was in the Muslim work before he was on the division committee before I was. I had him write this for me. This is a very well documented. Steve Parker is a graduate pastor out of Walla Walla, college educated in Adventist terminology, and he did a very good job here. You can print this out, and we can also send you the trifolds of this. Section 2, Protestant historians, J.A. Wiley and Davenet. And this is one of the most significant things that we find. This is Wiley's material. It says here, the following quote on J.A. Wiley is taken from a publisher's preface of the Maroon Missionary Press. The Reverend James Aiken Wiley, for many years a leading Protestant spokesman born in Scotland in 1808, was educated at Marshall College, Aberdeen, at the St. Andrews. He entered the original succession of Divinity Hall Edinburgh in 1827 and was ordained in 1831. Dr. Wiley became sub-editor of the Edinburgh Witness in 1846, and after joining the Free Church of Scotland in 1852, edited the Free Church Record from 1852 until 1860. In 1860, he was appointed lecturer on popery at the Protestant Institute, a position he held until the year of his death in May 1, 1890. He didn't support the Pope. That's what it's meaning here. He lectured on what Islam was all about, as not what Islam, excuse me, what the Roman Catholic Church was all about. Okay, now, in this document, Wiley has many statements here that show something that was one of the times that I just had to sit back and say, wow, I never understood this. Here it says, talk of the devastation of the Turk and of raising armies to resist him. There is no Turk in all the world like the Roman Turk. What he's saying here, the Roman Catholic system was worse than the Turkish Ottoman Empire as far as killing. It is not true that under the vast expanse of heaven, there is nothing more corrupt, more hateful than the Roman court. In vice and corruption, it infinitely exceeds the Turks. So Wiley understood, and he wrote this down for history. So we can see, we have people today in Adventism that says Roman Catholicism started the Ottoman Turkish Empire or the Muslim faith, and they control it. My brothers and sisters, that's the furthest thing from the truth ever, because there is no evidence of that pastor in Adventism saying those things, because it's non-existent. It is non-existent, any kind of facts like that at all. In fact, it was just the opposite. God brought Islam about to put a checkmate on Rome. Here it says, the word of God, the source whence all freedom springs, must be left free. I'm reading the highlighted portions of this document. The armies of the Turk were gathering around Constantinople, and the queen of the East was about to bow her head to sink in a tempest of pillage, of rape, and slaughter. The land of Bohemia, watered as though a plenteous rain once again, and a third time with German blood, was gloomy and silent. Germany had suffered far more than she had inflicted. From the Rhine to the Elbe, the Black Forest, the Baltic, the nations were lamenting their youth slaughtered in the ill-fated campaigns into which Rome had drawn them against the Hussites. See, Rome would sit in Rome and at the Pope, and the person who ran the government was Charles V out of Spain. Excuse me. He raised the armies. He raised them from Europe, took these youth in Germany, and ran them into a slaughter with the Ottoman Turks. And they never won, because God was protecting the Reformation. Page 452 of Volume 1. A second attack came from the Bishop of Constance. In a pastoral letter which he issued to his clergy, he drew a frightful picture of the state of Christendom. On the frontier stood the Turk, and the heart of the land were men more dangerous than Turks, sowing damnable heresies. This is how the Roman Catholic system was looked in Europe, and they looked at Turkey, and Turkey wasn't that bad. Here, reading from the document. When a crisis arose in the affairs of the Reformation, the kings obedient to the Roman see united their swords to strike with a blow so decisive that they would not need to strike a second time. The Turk, obeying one whom he knew not, would straightway present himself on the eastern limits of the Europe, and in so menacing an attitude that the swords unsheathed against the poor Protestants had to be turned in another quarter. The Turk was the lightning rod that drew off the tempest. Thus did Christ cover his little flock with the shield of the Muslim. In the Old Testament, we start to see a pattern of how God used the children of the East, to bring judgment, to bring protection of God's people. Where did Moses get educated? The children of the East. Caleb was a member of a Gentile group. He stood up to the Israelites who said, we cannot overcome. You start to see a pattern. And this is what I want you to get to understand. To realize that Islam is still marching to somebody they do not know, but they're doing God's will to protect his people. That is why that I've come to realize that Muslims many times have told myself and others in this work, we will protect you regardless what happens to you. And that's true. I believe that because God has used them before, he'll use them again. Down here in the red writing, Charles V, he was the Spanish emperor who led the political side of the government for Rome that was the army. Charles V, that was raised to defend the church, and now is beneath the shadow of Suleiman the Turk that she finds asylum. How visible the hand of God, how marvelous his providence. I'll read the yellow. The execution of the emperor's edict against Luther, which they had been charged, must lie over till they had found means of compelling Suleiman and his hordes to return to their land. Some swords were about to be unsheathed above Luther's head when some 100,000 Turkish sycamores are unsheathed over theirs. You see, as much as the Pope wanted to kill Luther and Melanchthon, God had many more of his people, the people who were the children of the East. Abraham's other side of the family were now coming to the aid of God's people. Remember when we read in Deuteronomy 21, he is the strength. He is the strength of the family. And now he's exercising that God-given strength to protect the concept of righteousness that Luther was preaching and living. Here it says in the red, Pope Adrian was afraid of the Turkish people. The main business which had brought it together was the inroads of the Turk. The progress of Suleiman's arms was fitted to strike the European nations with terror. To complete the embroilment, the Turk was thundering at the gates of Austria and threatening to march right into the heart of Christendom. Passing Vienna, Suleiman was pouring his hordes into Turkey. He had slain Louis, the king of that country, in the terrible battle of Mohawk, and the Archduke of Ferdinand of Austria, leaving the reformers at liberty to prosecute their work of upbuilding, had suddenly quieted the Diet of Spears. It had gone to contest on many bloody field his claim to the now vacant throne in Hungary. On every side the sword was busy. Armies were continually on the march. Cities were besieged. Europe was a sea on whose bosom the great winds from the four quarters of heaven were contending with all their fury. You see, as Rome fought, the Protestants were given latitude to function and the gospel could spread. My friend, God prepared this army to deliver his people at Wittenberg. The Turk is closing in fierce conflict with the Christian and the leisure of Ferdinand of Austria, which otherwise might be worse employed, is fully occupied in driving back the hordes of the Tartar invasion. That was the Ottoman Empire. This is an interesting statement here that I found in Wiley's writings. It is you, said the adherents of the old creed, addressing the Lutherans. So this is Rome, the prelates talking to Luther or his followers. It is you, said the adherents of the old creed, addressing the Lutherans, who have brought this scourge upon us. It is you who have unloosed these angels of evil. They have come to chastise you for your heresy. You have cast off the yoke of the Pope, and now you must bear the yoke of the Turk. Now this is what Luther is saying back to the Roman clerics. Not so, said Luther. It is God who has unloosed this army, whose king is Abaddon the Destroyer. They have been sent to punish us for our sins, our ingratitude for the gospel, our blasphemies, and above all, our shedding of the blood of the righteous. Luther was giving it back to Rome because we as Seventh-day Adventists need to realize of how God uses his people, his biblical chosen people, to deliver his people at the right time. We as Seventh-day Adventists need to realize these people are still controlled by God according to his will. They may not know what it's all about, but I contend that we Seventh-day Adventists have a right to tell them, because they do have a right to know the whole story. But the terrible calamity of Ottoman subjection was not to befall Europe. The Turk had reached the fullest limits of his progress westward. From this point, his slaughtering hordes were to be rolled back. While the cities and provinces of Germany waited in terror, the tramp of his war horses and the gleam of his sycamores, there came the welcome tidings that the Asiatic warriors had sustained a severe repulse before Vienna on 16 October 1529, and were now in full retreat to the Bosphorus. The scarcity of provisions to which the Turkish camp was exposed and the early approach of winter with its snowstorms combined to the effect of the raising the siege of the retreat of the invaders. But Luther recognized in this unexpected deliverance the hand of God, and the answer of prayer. We Germans are always snoring, he explained, indignant at some whose gratitude was not so lively as he thought it should have been. And there are many traitors amongst us. Pray, he wrote to Myconus, against the Turks. Pray, he wrote to Myconus, against the Turk and the gates of hell, that the angel not destroy one little city for the sake of one just soul in it, so we may be spared for the sake of a few righteous that are in Germany. If Charles, the ruler of Europe, had succeeded in extirpating or killing the Protestants, the Turk would have come after him and gathered the spoils. It was the Turk who suddenly stepped forward to save Protestantism in Hungary, though he was well unaware of the service that he performed. Suleiman the Magnificent, setting out from Constantinople on the 23rd of April, 1526, at the head of a mighty army, which, receiving accessions as it marched onward, was sullen at last to 300,000 Turks, was coming nearer and nearer Hungary. Like the wasting leaven, the land now shook with terror. King Louis was without money, without soldiers. The nobility was divided into factions. The priests thought only of pursuing the Protestants, and the common people, deprived of their laws and their liberty, were without spirit, without patriotism. Zapolo, the lord of 72 castles, and by far the most powerful grandee in the country, sat still, expecting, if the king were overthrown, to be called to mount the vacant throne. Meanwhile, the terrible Turk was approaching and demanding of Louis that he should pay him tribute under the threat of planting the crescent, that was the flag of Islam, on all the churches of Hungary, and slaughtering him and his grandees as fat oxen. The edict of death passed against all Protestants still remained in force. Now, this is the edict that was done at the Diet of Spears, that they wanted to kill Luther with. That was still in force. And the monks, in the face of the black tempest that was rising in the east, were still stirring up the people to have all the Lutherans put to death. The powerful and patriotic Count Fleminger had received a message from the king, commanding him not to put in execution his cruel edicts against the heretics, threatening him with the severest displeasure if he should refuse, and promising him great rewards if he obeyed. The count shuddered to execute these horrible commands, nor could he stand silently by and see others execute them. He set out to tell the king that if, instead of permitting his Protestants subjects to defend the country on a battlefield, he should drag them to the stake and burn them, he would bring down the wrath of heaven upon himself and his kingdom on the road to Buda. That's Budapest, we know today, but Buda. There the king resided. Fleminger was met with the terrible news. While the count was exerting himself to shield the Protestants, King Louis had set out to stop the advance of the powerful Suleiman. On the 29th of August, a little army of 27,000 met the multitude hordes of Turkey at Mohawk on the Danube. Suleiman's force was 15 times greater than that of the king. Think about that. God's army was 15 times bigger than the Catholic army that wanted to kill Luther. You see, when I was reading this, starting to understand the significance of Islam and their job to protect God's will, I understood, because I often wondered, why didn't the Pope just go kill Luther? He couldn't, because God intervened with the mighty army of the Muslim power to protect Luther and Melanchthon, and Luther and Melanchthon never grasped the understanding of what was going on. They received little tinges of light, of insight, but they didn't fully grasp it all. My friends, we as Seventh-day Adventists had better grasp who the second beast of chapter 17 of Revelation is and what's going on in our country from now on out, because Jesus is coming. Jesus is coming, and other people are shedding their blood to get the attention of the world. Here, while exerting himself to shield the Protestants, King Louis had set out to stop the advance on the powerful Suleiman. On the 29th of August, a little army of 27,000 met the multitudes and hordes at Mohawks in the Danube. Suleiman's force was 15 times greater than that of the king. Louis gave the command of his army to the Archbishop of Cologne, an ex-Franciscan monk more familiar with the sword than with the chaplet, and who had won some glory in the art of war. When the king put on his armor in the morning of the battle, he observed to be deathly pale. All foresaw the issue. "Here go 27,000 Hungarians," exclaimed the bishop, and as the host defiled past him into the kingdom of heaven as the martyrs for faith, he consoled himself with the hope that the chancellor would survive to see their canonization by the Pope. The issue was even more terrible than the worst anticipations of it. By evening, the plain of Mohawk was covered with Hungarian dead, piled in gory heaps. 28 princes, 500 nobles, seven bishops, 20,000 warriors lay cold in death. Escaping from the scene of carnage, the king and the papal legate sought safety in flight. Louis had to cross a black pool which lay in his course. His horse bore him through it, but in climbing the opposite bank, the horse fell backward, crushing the monarch and giving him burial in the marsh. The papal nuncio, like the ancient seer from the mountains of Aram, was taken and killed. Having trampled down the king and his army, the virtuous Suleiman held on his way to Hungary and slaughtered 200,000 of its inhabitants. You see the blood that's been shed for our right to be Seventh-day Adventists. And here we have people telling us today in Adventism about something of no wrath. It doesn't back up, according to world history, in the book of Revelation at all. The calamity which thrilled all of Europe brought rest to the Protestants. This action of 200,000 people dying brought rest to the Protestants. Two candidates now contested for the scepter of Hungary. John Sapolo, the unpatriotic grandee who saw his king march to death, but still sat in his castle, and Archduke Ferdinand of Austria both caused themselves to be crowned. And hence arose a civil war, which complicated with occasional appearances of Suleiman upon the scene, occupied the two rivals for years, and left them no leisure to carry out the persecuting edicts. In the midst of these troubles, Protestants made rapid progress. Peter Pinelli, a powerful noble, embraced the gospel. With his two sons, many more magnates followed his example, and settled Protestant ministers upon their domains, built churches, planted schools, sent their sons to study at Wittenberg. The greater number of the towns of Hungary embraced the Reformation. Now, this is something very interesting. The widow here of the Hungarian king, she had a son, and this is what this paragraph's about. The widow, not less ambitious than her deceased husband, caused her son to be proclaimed king of Hungary. Feeling herself unable to contend in arms with Ferdinand, that's the Catholic power, she placed the young prince under the protection of Suleiman, whose aid she craved. So here we have Suleiman the Magnificent protecting a Protestant king. This led to the reappearance of the Turkish army in Hungary. The country endured in consequences manifold calamities. Many of the Protestant pastors fled, and the evangelization was stopped. But these disorders lasted only a little while. The Turks were wholly indifferent to the doctrinal controversy between the Protestant and the Papist. In truth, they had been disposed to draw the sword in persecution. It would have been against the Romans, whose temples filled with idols were especially abhorrent to them. The consequence was that the everlasting agencies were speedily resumed. The pastors returned to the Hungarian New Testament of Sylvester, was being circulated throughout the land, and the progress of Protestantism in Hungary was greater, at least more obvious than ever under the reign of Islam. The gospel had greater quietness in Hungary. Did you get that statement? The gospel had greater quietness with the power of Islam than with the Catholic Church, and flourished more than perhaps would have been the case had the kingdom been governed solely by the House of Austria. Many Protestants found the scepter of the Turks lighter than the rod of the Papist. The pashas were besieged by solicitations and bribes, and put the preachers to death, or at least to banish them. But their Turkish rulers, more than their Christian opponents, refused to condemn till first they had made the inquiry and read the interrogation, commonly sufficed to make the patent fact that the Romanists worshipped by images. The Protestants bowed to God alone. This was enough for the Muslim governor. Without seeking to go deeper to the points of difference, he straightway gave orders that no hindrance should be offered to the preaching of that gospel which the great Mufti of Wittenberg had discovered. This, in all the Transylvanian towns and plains under the Muslim, the Protestant faith continued to spread. My friends, this is some of the documents we were finding. And I wanted to put them here so that the world could see. Dabinet, we just have one page here for what he says. For the Turks permits us to bleed, but the Pope forbids it. War broke out between the Prince Francis I, and as it were not enough to occupy the emperor, Suleiman made an incursion into Hungary. Charles, thus attacked on all sides, was forced to forget the monk about worms and his religious innovations. You see, God was in charge to protect Luther. I can't emphasize that enough, because in Adventism today, we don't hear the history at all. We hear Seventh-day Adventist pastors claiming Islam is a scourge of the earth. Islam is a scourge of the earth if you're a Roman Catholic in this day. My friends, when I find Muslims willing to listen, and I share them about what we Seventh-day Adventists believe, it's a new day. Assalamu alaikum. They bring great blessings to you and I. Those Muslims do not know the God yet who's calling them for these actions, but they are. They are. Yet Ferdinand still hesitated. Muhammad himself came to the aid of the gospel. Louis, the king of Hungary and Bohemia, drowned at Mohawk on the 29th of August, 1526, as he was fleeing from Suleiman III, had bequeathed the crown of these two kingdoms to Ferdinand, but the Duke of Bavaria and the Waiwand of Transylvania, and above all, the terrible Suleiman contested it against him. This was sufficient to occupy Charles's brother. He left Luther and hastened to dispute two thrones. You see, it's time and time again, Muslims step up, shed their blood to bring the pressure off Luther and Melanchthon at Wittenberg. All is accomplished, said Luther. The Turk had reached the highest degree of his power. The glory of the papacy is declining. The world is splitting on every side. The reformer dreading lest the end of the world should arrive before he had translated all the Bible, published the prophecies of Daniel separately. A work, said he, for latter times. Historians tell us. He added that Alexander the Great always placed Homer under his pillow. The prophet Daniel is worthy not only that kings and princes should lay him under their heads, but carry him in their hearts, for he will teach them that the government of nations proceeds from the power of God. The reason Islam had reached its pinnacle, they were brought about for one reason. Muhammad was brought about for one reason, and that was to bring deliverance to the Reformation, or Martin Luther's concept of righteousness by faith. Once Luther's work had started to spread all over Europe and into England, then the Ottoman Turk was no longer needed. They were called about for a specific reason. My friends, we need to be aware today that Islam may be very well called about for a specific reason again, to get the message of righteousness by faith, one God, that Isa el-Messiah is the Savior of the world. My friends, are we going down the same paths that our spiritual forefathers did 500 years ago? We need to be extremely cognizant and be reading our Bibles and praying and asking God to guide us. Section 3, James Freeman Clark, Matthew Henry, John Gill, Adam Clark, Albert Barnes. I'm not going to go over these, but I have these here for this reason. I found out that all these men here believed that Revelation 9 was Islam, at some shape or form in their theology. They were Protestants. These are people that, if you're going through the seminary at Andrews, you've got to read about. So our young pastors, they were reading material from Protestant theologians that had Islam in the Bible. And when I found that, I said, what don't our pastors get? The sad thing, nothing's changed. And I'm just going to scan through this real quick, because these are all Protestants. It had some aspect of Islam in chapter 9. They didn't all agree the same, but they understood chapter 9 of Revelation had something to do with Islam. Go back up here. This here is the first document that I created to go before a Muslim audience in 2003 with an evangelistic effort. The people that knew I was going to do that said, "You're making a big mistake. You don't evangelize Muslims that way." And I'm thinking, why not? Why not? When I read all these histories that Islam had shed their blood to protect the Reformation and all those things, I said, why can't they understand? From this work, 5 Muslims made a decision to follow Jesus. My friends, the prophecies that God has given this church still work. Still work. In the Quran here, it says the law and the gospel of the Quran. It said, "It is he who sat down to thee step by step, in truth the book, confirming what went before it. He sent down the law of Moses and the gospel of Jesus. Before this, as a guide to mankind, and he sent down the criterion of judgment between right and wrong." That's the Quran. And here I was told the Quran is the devil's book. Sin to a Muslim talks about that. What is it? Baptism. Text in the Quran about that. People of the book. Surah 262. Those who believe in the Quran and those who follow the Jewish scriptures and the Christians and Sabians and who believe in Allah on the last day and work righteousness shall have their reward with their Lord. On them shall be no fear, nor shall they grieve. I want to get on here because I don't want to keep you too much prophets from the Quran. Talks about that in Surah 177. Quran, state of dead and resurrection. Yes, they believe in resurrection. The Sabbath, we covered that the other day. This is what's in the resource book. Now, this I found, I just brought this out, in the Quran we use, in the major Quran. Let's see. Jason, can you give me the Quran there? Right there. Okay. This Quran right here is green. And on a note that Yusuf Ali put in here, he uses the word Seventh-day Adventist. They're not like the other Christians. They choose Sabbath as the day of worship, whereas the other one choose Sunday. We're the only denomination named by name in the Muslim Quran. My friends, we have a responsibility to these people. Not this generation obviously shed their blood for me, but their generations previous to that died by the hundreds, if not thousands, in delivering Luther and Melanchthon. This here is a story of John the Baptist, is in here. All the Quranic verses about him. Very interesting read. That's all in this resource book. It's in the Called to Display His Glory by Brian Gallant. Brian Gallant was the Muslim director of the North American Division here a few years back. He's now a pastor in the Missouri Conference, and he has good insights. And I put his document in here. Now, Isaiah 60. I'm going to cover this the last night that we have the feast. This is the promise of God to the Arab people and what the Arab people are going to do in the world at that point in time. That's Isaiah 60. What I have here, I have every word that's in Isaiah 60 broke down by Strong's Concordance in this document. So you can see exactly what it means, because it's so significant. When I read this in a mosque that went over a podcast for 9 different countries in the Middle East, the sheikh had no idea what I was going to read, what I was preaching that night. I remember he stood up where he was He talked to his young kids up there who were the computer whiz kids. He said, I want this duplicated and I want this put out again. My friends, the God of heaven has given us the word of God that is powerful than a two-edged sword. Muslims who are aware of what's going on, this sheikh also believed that Isa el-Masih was going to come again. He was looking forward. He told me, he says, we Muslims are looking forward to the return of Jesus. Just amazing. These are God's people. And we have the information they need. But the problem is, many of us people, we are reluctant. We're afraid of them. Because I also have Ellen G. White comments about Isaiah 60 from the Spirit of Prophecy. I have that listed here too, so you can read it all. Look what she has to say about it. Because I have to be right out there. Completely. Now, I told you I'd cover ravens. I'm going to do that before I close. This here section, pioneers, here, let me go down here to the ravens. Now, this is in the document that we found in the E.G. White archives. And I'm going to go down here to where we had retyped it. Okay. This here is written from Stephen Haskell to Ellen White. The response down here is written from Willie White to Elder Burgess. Okay, let me read. This is from, this is written to Ellen White by Haskell. The law of the unclean and clean meats, and the third one was why Noah was permitted to eat flesh meat. The fourth one was the relation of a vegetable diet to eternal life. And the fifth was why the Lord ate the calf with Abraham, and then why the Savior ate fish. Here I understand it has been taught. Could not be shown that the Lord did eat the calf with Abraham or his fish with the disciples. As these come out, if it is not too much for you, I would like to have you read them and notice the positions I take, especially in reference to these points, but there is one point that I have not made any allusion to, and that was about the ravens bringing flesh to Elijah. What troubled me was to harmonize the idea of a carnivorous bird which lived on carrion, bringing flesh meat to his prophet. I could not see it in anything that was elevating, and nothing that would bring out a moral on the form. So I waited for further light, and I talked with Brother Prescott upon it and some others, and they proposed to look up the original word. I went to see Brother Amadon. Now, Brother Amadon was Grace Amadon's dad. He was in the review. He was an administrator in the review as an office manager, whatever in that. I went to see Brother Amadon, talked with him, and he gave me some light, but said Edson had told him once that you had seen that matter. So I asked Edson in reference to it, and he said that you had said that it was that I was not a bird at all, but it was some black people or Arabians that brought him meat. I had come to this conclusion from certain things I had found a few days ago. I found a long argument in the book on that subject, for and against, and finally the writer quoted from Jerome as a historian, a rare ability and one who could be relied upon, and Jerome said after showing that God did not work that way. When there was no necessity for it, that there was a tribe of Arabians that furnished Elijah with flesh meat. If the matter comes to your mind and you feel free to state concerning it, I would be glad to hear what you have to say about it. Is this correct? It has seemed to me It must be so. That is what Edson said you have seen, and it relieved my mind very much. Then I could see some consistency in the matter and learn a lesson and draw a lesson from it. It may be that I'll have something more to say, but just now I have not more time. Signed, Elder Haskell. And then it says here, Elder Burgess, this is Willie White writing now. Your letter, July 9th, came to hand Friday. I must endeavor to respond to your inquiries. Sometime before the revised version of the Old Testament was printed, there was a rumor that in the new version, the story of Elijah being fed by ravens would be changed to read that he was fed by Arabs. One Sabbath while in Switzerland, I mentioned this to Mother and asked her if Elijah was fed by birds or by men. Mother replied that Elijah was fed by the most wicked of the wicked, sometimes by men fleeing from justice, sometimes by men looking for water. When they saw Elijah in his plight, a man by the river without food, their hearts were moved to bestow upon him the necessary food from their scanty supply. I asked, did birds take part in this? And then she said, they may have, but as the matter was presented to me, he was supplied with food by the passing bands of traders. I waited to see if Mother would incorporate this into her testimony history chapters, and when I saw that she made no reference to it, I concluded that it was one among many matters revealed to her, the details of which she did not think best to put into publication. I assure you, Brother Burgess, I was glad to hear from you. I've been sorry that I was away from home at the time of your visit to St. Helena. I'm hoping that you are comfortably located and that the next time you may come to Southern California. In a letter which I wrote last Friday, I gave some information about the employment of my 5 younger children. If you could find a copy of this, I will enclose it to you. Now, these documents here, one is the Turkish-Armenian question written by E.J. Wagner. This is very interesting, what Wagner had to say about what was going on in the Middle East at the time. And we have other documents here that are there for you to look at. The Great Controversy, Chapter 18, American Reformer. The reason I have that here is to show you the chapter, but I don't have it all written out because you all have great controversy. You can read about this and the August 11th date, 1840. Prophets and Kings, Hope for the Heathen. That's a full chapter. Read that. It's good. Gives you some good insight about what God is hoping for the heathen, what Ellen White wrote there. And here we have by Robert Whelan, the look on the daily, the proper viewpoint. You can read that at your leisure. I'm not going to read anything from that because Whelan put it there, and I respect Elder Whelan highly. The humanity of Christ. The humanity of the Son of God is everything to us. It is the golden chain that binds our souls to Christ and through Christ to God. My friends, unfortunately, we talk about always Jesus as the God aspect when we need to be talking about his humanity because he's your brother and my brother, because he has experienced the same things. We don't want to put him way out there. We want to make him close to us. That's just common sense. And this document covers that as there's different, it says the prophecy, the foundation of our faith. It says, we then took the position that the Bible and the Bible only was to be our guide. And we are never to depart from this position. We were given wonderful manifestations of power of God. Miracles were wrought again and again. When we were brought into straight places, the power of God was displayed in our behalf. We have documents like this, standing in the way of God's messages. We are to hold fast the first principles of our denominated faith and go forward from strength to strength. In the past 50 years, the past 50 years have not dimmed one jot or one principle of our faith as we have received the great and wonderful evidence. that were made certain to us in 1844 after the passing of time. The languishing souls are to be confirmed and quickened according to his word, and many of the ministers of the gospel and the Lord's physicians will have their languishing souls quickened according to the word. Not a word is changed or denied. Remember that. Very true. The Bible only. We have a page like this. But God will have a people upon earth to maintain the Bible only, as a standard of all doctrines and the basis of all reforms. Now, Quran Fox to reach Muslims. This is an 8.5-11 piece here, and key text. But I want to read this one right here. Fight. It says, fight those who believe not in God, nor the last day, nor hold that forbidden which hath been forbidden by God and his apostle, nor acknowledge the religion of truth, even if they are people of the book until they pay with tax, with willing submission, and feel themselves subdued. Now look at this text. It's very important. You may feel, boy, I can't reach Muslims. I don't know what to say to them. Well, then what are you going to say to them when they want to kill you? Because they believe you're a regular Christian. Because it says, fight those who believe not in God nor the last day. Seventh-day Adventists, we believe in Allah, we believe in one God, we believe in the last day. Nor hold that forbidden which hath been forbidden by God and his apostle. We don't eat pork. We don't drink. Even if they are people of the book. I'm not a Christian. I'm a Seventh-day Adventist. And I want to get you people to realize you have a blessing by being a Seventh-day Adventist. Don't worry about calling yourself a Christian. Seventh-day Adventist, and let the Muslim say, what's that? I don't eat pork. That's what I say. And that's what gets me in the door of a Muslim home. Every single time. I've never been denied entrance anywhere with a Muslim when they ask me, what's a Seventh-day Adventist? I don't eat pork. I worship one God. We don't have idols in our church. Really? We thought all Christians did. I'm not a Christian. I'm a Seventh-day Adventist. That's a God-given name. I would encourage you to use it. My friends, that's the end of my resource book. That's in our webpage. That will be up in a few days, and aspects of it are up there now. But I just want to encourage